You could have heard this episode 48 hours early on our Patreon, patreon.com/indieheadspodcast. By joining us for as low as $1 a month, you'll see episodes early and gain access to our Discord server. All our upcoming episodes will be on our Patreon 48 hours before it hits our public podcast feeds. But if you're hearing this via our Patreon feed, we thank you so much for your support. We especially want to thank our Real Ones patrons, including Becca Etienne, Georgia Mikowski, James Boss, Holiday Kirk, Tyler, Marcy Anime, Chance Holdup, Delaney Mothman, Josiah Duncan, Jenna, Matt Cameron, Grant in the Back of My Dracula, Pablo Escobar's Hippos, Jackson Chris, Alec Felder, Jeremy Bowl, Alex Grichmanoff, Andrew Grieve, JP, Matthew Taylor, Breen Hare, Drew Wharton, I Like Books, Jonathan David, Sarah Moore, Max Kapazinski, Mark Barry, Darian Fisher, Cal50, Noah's Refused Pimped Out Dave Matthews Event, Chris Wade, Midwest Maxwell, Kevin John, Jake Wald, Erase Red Baby, Keep Autism Weird, Rob Mariano, Max, Dylan, Zach, Gavin 490 Freak, and Maze Farms. To become a real one, consider supporting us for $5 a month on Patreon and receive a bonus episode every month and get a shout out at the top of the pod. Anyways though, enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Indieheads podcast. I'm your host, Matty, aka @MarvianPrince on Twitter. On this episode, I am joined by Max and Jackie and special guest from Endless Scroll, Michael Brooks. Welcome back to the pod, Michael.
Hi, thanks so much for having me back. I'm stoked to be here.
God, it's been, a year and a half, almost 2 years. I think we had you on the Government Plates Death Grips episode we did.
That's
but
right.
Now,
yeah, an experience I'll never forget.
There we go. And now we've got you again. Michael is one of the chillest people that I think me and Jackie know. And it only makes sense we bring him in for this episode because, it's a little chilly. It's a little cold. It's a little cold right now. I feel a chill wave.
Proud of that one?
Coming on. Well, I've been making that joke. We've been making that joke for over a year now.
Chris made it on. Chris Wade made that joke on one of the Best New Podcast episodes that we were doing, and since then I've kind of had this idea in the back of my head, like, oh, we should just do a chillwave episode eventually. And then one of our patrons, I believe it was Alex Krishmanoff, had the idea also and submitted a playlist when I had already made one, and so I just sort of Frankenstein monstered together my playlist and Alex's playlist, and also tried to make it. Originally, it was more like my specific history with this stuff, but then I kind of made it a little more general. Tried to make it lean a little more toward classics of chillwave, sort of, with a couple of personal.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, even as someone who's not the biggest expert on chillwave, there's a couple. We'll get into it. There's a couple ones where I'm like, this is chillwave, or this song of this artist instead of this song, but that's nitpicky. That's neither here nor there.
We'll get into those, I'm sure.
We got 14 songs to get into, and let's start off with Chrome Sparks' Marijuana.
Yeah, I'm very excited to start with this one because wait, hold on, Matty, are you playing?
I'm trying to hit play. It's not letting me hit play.
Oh, gosh, I was worried that the screenshot.
1 second. I gotta quit on my Spotify really quick and try to restart it.
Dang streaming services. Anyways, Marijuana Chrome Sparks is our first song, and you will hear it playing shortly. But this was definitely the one I had to go with first just because of the on the noseness of the song being called Marijuana. But also as immediately when I posted this playlist, the Kitty Pride rap song that she does over this beat. This is just one of my favorite
raps.
This is one of my favorite beats of this sort of era of early internet rap stuff. And as its own song, it was also just a song I listened to a whole lot then and now. It's just a very, I don't know. I'm gonna be saying this a lot. It's just it's a very good job at setting the atmosphere and having these kind of fast drums that are set against a slower. I don't want to make the exact. I'm avoiding trying to say the exact YouTube comment that I think should be the title of this episode, which is someone saying the song sounds deceptively slow, but the lyrical delivery is actually faster than I can even read. It really has a feeling similar to weed. And that's just the general
That's
vibe.
A long episode title, Jackie. I don't know if I can fit that all in.
A feeling similar to weed, I think, is the episode title.
We got James Joyce on the titles.
But I think I think this is like the perfect example of like the appeal, but also the kind of like limitations of the genre. You know, it's like I think this is a great song, but also at some level, it is just like music for guys to go like, whoa, this is like trippy, man. But I think this song manages to avoid feeling like some of these songs feel a little cliche when you go back to them years later. They don't have the same magic, but I think this one holds up pretty well. I like it a lot still because there's a lot like musically dynamically going on with it, I think.
This episode's already crazy because I already have a Zebulon is already branded to my wrist just listening to this playlist.
Oh my god.
I just kidding. I went to a show last night at Zebulon LA, and this is how I got into the show. Anyway,
if you're a coastal elite, Zebulon may be the name of a theater in your town. If you're from the Heartland South, like the Triangle in North Carolina, Zebulon is a town 30 minutes outside of Raleigh.
Well, in LA,
Zebulon. It's like the Baby's All Right of Los Angeles, California.
That is exactly what it is. Unfortunately,
what does that mean? What is Baby's All Right?
Baby's All Right is like the hipster New York venue, Max.
It's like a venue that's like is a bar that people will go to when there are not shows there, but there are also shows there in a very hipstery part of a coastal elite city. Basically, they have a lot in common. Zebulon was where I don't think you were there, but recently my friends were at the Kim Gordon, Mary Lattimore show, and saw Bo Burnham and Phoebe Bridgers there. So confirmed the canoodling with their own eyes, which was very funny.
Yeah.
But that's the type of stuff that'll happen at Zebulon, to give you an idea.
See, that's the thing. That's the crazy thing, is that people have said that we should change the name of this podcast, and that, you know, this podcast has gone far beyond what it used to be. But here's the thing: we get exclusives. We get exclusives like that.
Indie music exclusives.
We get indie music exclusives, and we're talking about indie music right now. This is for the first time in a while, this is a fully independent indie music playlist that we're discussing here.
It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Matty, what do you think of this song?
I think this song is pretty good, and this is a question I was going to mainly ask you, but I'll throw it out to the panel in general. I guess before we get into like more of the songs here, like here's the thing. I just want to say to state it right off the bat. If you listen to this podcast, you've heard me for many years. I don't know music theory or instruments or any of that shit well, because I don't play music. I don't make music. The only time I made music was when I was 15 years old, when I did like 2 or 3 rap songs, only one of which exists, thank God. Anyways, like what would you say, Jackie, and I guess Michael and Max, I guess more Jackie and Michael here. What are like the core musical? Well, this is just for like the chill wave. This is for people that like the chill wave experts, the people that are thinking about this genre the most. What are like the core musical tenets of chill wave besides music to smoke marijuana to? Because that's the obvious one. But like
I think
like what are the connecting elements between like all these songs, or like some of the connecting pieces between like most of these songs?
I'll let Michael speak to your relationship with chillwave and how you would sort of define this, but I think in general it's obviously a pretty vague, loose agglomeration of a lot of different things that just sort of happened to be happening at the same time, and in a very music writer way we just sort of draw a big circle around a lot of stuff and then attempt to like create a sort of narrative meaning out of it. But it is sort of a shared sensibility around a lot of music that was happening at this time. And I did have the challenge of like, okay, where do you start and end it? And how do you decide what ends up on this playlist? Because I dabbled a little bit into some full-on indie rock stuff, but I didn't want it to just be like MGMT and Animal Collective and every sort of psychedelic indie band of this era, because some of those bands have songs and moments that feel like they are tangential to this sort of wave of music, and some of it doesn't at all. And I wanted to focus specifically on the electronic beat driven aspect of it, like a lot of generally synthesizers, but not necessarily, a lot of just like very washed out melodic elements juxtaposed with a lot of electronic beats and textures is kind of the vibe. And just in general, like a new approach to psychedelic music being driven by the introduction of like digital music platforms, like basically like, oh, there was some like 2000s psyche stuff, you know, like Flaming Lips and stuff like that. But this is like, okay, now we have Ableton, we have Fruity Loops, whatever. And like all of the different strains of like chill music that sort of excelled in the early streaming era because of an increasing demand that would sort of continue on into the current day for like just chill vibe oriented music of all sorts of kinds, basically. Michael, what do you think about this?
No, I think that's a great way to look at it. I think trying to pinpoint exactly what chillwave is a bit of a fool's errand. Although I do think that a lot of artists who were categorized as chillwave share a lot of different elements in their sound. I think definitely to a certain extent, chillwave is a mood over everything
Yeah.
else, which is how I think you get a lot of different artists all thrown in under one belt. But I think at the beginning of chillwave, sampling was certainly a big part of it. I think there's a lot of similarities to the early chillwave stuff and like the brain feeder scene, lots
Yeah.
of like beat making stuff where the DNA really isn't that far from chillwave. And I think another huge aspect of chillwave are the reverb drenched vocals. That's sort of one characteristic that all artists that fall under that umbrella sort of share.
Mhm.
But yeah, I agree. It's really hard to try and figure out what's chillwave and what's not. I think it's in the eye of the beholder more than anything else.
I think it's like partially because it's not all ambient, but a lot of it is like an ambient kind of vibe-based thing. Chillwave itself is kind of a nebulous term that's already being used to encompass like a lot of different acts that just don't either people don't know how to classify differently, or it's like a secondary subgenre. It's like this music is like psychedelic pop and it's also chillwave. I feel like besides like I guess Neon Indian, who we'll get into later, I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with this genre, but it feels like there aren't a lot of acts that were like they're primarily chillwave. It's this one thing or this certain genre that is also like, oh, it's in the chillwave umbrella.
And as we go through the playlist, I think that will sort of reveal itself because there are a lot of artists in here that, like you're saying, it's like for this moment in time, they're all lumped together. And then as their careers go on, they either change their musical direction, go off somewhere else, or the reality is they were actually just in a different place. And like as their trajectories go on, we learn where we should actually be lumping them in, you know, like as like the second half of the 2010s, like ambient music as a sort of thing becomes bigger. And then also you've got like I think Michael was really right to bring up the brain feeder stuff because that's like a big part of my entryway into this, and we'll get to that when we get to the brain feeder songs in there. But like growing up in Los Angeles, like one of the big things that was happening as I was like a teenager was that this like vibrant beat scene with like Low End Theory and Brain Feeder and all of this like instrumental hip hop stuff. And I think that is like a huge building block of almost all of this music, from the stuff that leans more like synth pop all the way to the stuff that is fully just like instrumental beat stuff. Like all of it has the DNA of people like Jay Dilla and Madlib, and the sampling style of that is like a huge part of it, even to the stuff that like leans a little more toward indie rock or leans a little more toward R&B or whatever.
Yeah.
Matty, we should just play a little bit of the Marijuana Kitty Pride song before we head out, and I can talk a little bit about Chrome Sparks because he's a guy that I'm still somewhat familiar with, and I think is a good example of like the point I was just making, which is that I think in this era, like all of these other different sort of iterations of this sound come out of this, and I think Chrome Sparks is a good example of like what we would call sort of like future bass that sort of comes out of this. With like Flume is another example. Is like Flume you could categorize as chillwave, like with a couple of his very earliest songs, and then very quickly he goes in more of like an EDM pop sort of direction. And I think Chrome Sparks is a similar sort of guy, although a little less commercialized. But he has a self-titled album from 2018 that's really good, and he's a guy that I've continued to follow and check in on every once in a while. But I do think Marijuana is still kind of his career peak, and this Kitty Pryde video is so great. It's just Kitty Pryde biking around.
I think
I've been thinking about Kitty Pryde so much recently with the new Lana album and the new 100xyyxx album. There's just a lot of Kitty Pryde moments. Actually, most wanted person in the United States just reminds me of Kitty Pryde so much. And I'm glad that energy is back in the universe, because I'm an unabashed Kitty Pryde fan.
I mean, I look at this and I really do like. I mean, it feels like culture is one. You know, it's 360ing back around to this sort of era, the indie sleaze era, which
I could tell you were trying not to. I knew I could hear.
I don't want to say it. I don't want to say.
It.
I'll be right. I mean, I'm doing something for someone to the sound talking about that new Dare song for their haters' delight.
If the Dropkick Murphys released their hit single today, I'd be shipping up to Bushwick.
But yeah, no, like it feels like chillwave was like that's like the dying breath of like either the dying breath of indie sleaze or what indie sleaze had eventually just evolved into, where it, you know, just instead of it, you know, indie sleaze, like what we consider like the peak of it was sort of like parties and togetherness, and like chillwave is sort of like feels much more individual. Like, okay, like let's take a step back and let's kind of individualize things a little bit.
I think that obviously, like as we've talked about, the whole indie sleaze thing was like a total like trying to make fetch happen situation. But I think it does make sense that the aesthetics would come back around, just because like all of the things that like sprouted out of this have their own little pockets of niche popularity on the internet. Like you think about like chill beats to study and relax to, or you think about people like Pink Panther. It's just like a lot of these like very airy, light, like vibey music, and like how streaming has only continued to encourage that sort of music because of the way people use streaming for just sort of ambient or background listening. Like it only makes sense that a lot of these things would come back into vogue after we've had many years of sort of the introspective singer-songwriter archetype, that we would just get a lot of like head empty music. And I think chillwave is a great kind of head empty music.
Okay, I have a question. I promise I'm trying not to be funny. Is there like an indie sleaze equivalent to Project X? Is that like Spring Breakers? Or...
I mean, Project X is a very like whatever. Indie sleaze is a large swath of things, but a lot of those things are encompassed in Project X, like Bloghouse, and yeah, no, that's an indie sleaze. Project X is indie sleaze.
Yeah.
Okay.
But let's move on. Let's move on to our next song, which I like this song a lot. It's probably my favorite song in the entire playlist. I do question why this one, and of course that song is So Many Details by Tori Moi.
I mean,
I only question because it's like if we're gonna talk about Tori Moi, you would think we would talk about something off of Causers of This, and not the one like his what I would consider to be his like first proper like post chillwave record, or like second post chillwave record. Like this is definitely, it's chillwave, but it feels like you would pick one of the like something off of like Blessa. Like Blessa was on Alex's initial playlist that he sent over.
I understand that, and I probably should have, but originally the playlist was sort of centered around me. My own. This is just I'm just a little bit younger, and so I don't think I was around for like the early. Like this is the song that is just like massive in my own childhood, and so I just picked it because I think I like this better than some of the earlier Toro stuff, but I also like that stuff is a little more in line with the aesthetics of this playlist in general. I just thought that this is just like a perfect song. I don't know, like I really love So Many Details, and I think it is I wanted to have it mostly be like straight up chillwave, but I did want to kind of indicate how this music very much infiltrated the sound of pop and R&B, and like how Toro ended up being a very influential figure on the sound of music in the 2010s. And I think this is the moment where he synthesizes the stuff that was going on in the chillwave stuff and the early stuff with this more pop leaning sound that just really works.
I mean, obviously, when I listen to the song, I think of one thing and one thing only. I think of Grand Theft Auto 5, because this is on the soundtrack of that game. It's on, I think, on the what is essentially the chillwave radio station, the Radio Mirror Park, which is their equivalent of Silver Lake, I'm pretty sure, or Echo Park.
Yeah.
So again, I've heard the song a number of times, and it's still very good.
Do you know there's a Haji remix to this song?
Oh God, yeah. Oh God, I gotta pull that up, because I remember there was we did not play the when we talked about on Rap Forum Veterans 1, we did not talk about the Toro remix of French. Because we forgot to talk about it. So I do want to hear the Haji version, because it's probably it's probably terrible. Because Haji Beach was just Haji had his moments, but overall not very good generally.
We tried to make Haji happen, and it turned out
I like
not.
that we're 2 songs into this playlist, and we've already moved over to Haji Beats. This is I am the right person to be here right now, and that feels good.
Hell yeah.
I mean, we're doing we've got Rap Forum Veterans
we're working
Volume 2 in like 2 weeks.
A lot of different wheelhouses that I knew. I mean, that was part of the other thing guiding me toward just wanting to do a chillwave episode, was like it just comes up a lot on Endless Scroll and IndieCast, and just like chillwave is in the air, it feels like these days, because nostalgia cycles happen quicker, and we're just sort of like, what was happening 10 years ago,
Sure,
and then I
that
can write an
sounds fine.
anniversary piece. And I'm always coming back. I mean, I've been revisiting a lot of this stuff anyways, because I was working on this DJ mix that's going to be coming out soon, that's like basically a series that my friend does that's like for dance music DJs to curate a mix of stuff that's not dance music, and like do a kind of like my other influences, and a lot of it is ending up being very chill wavy beat scene, like that kind of stuff that led me into the ambient music and electronic stuff that I like now. But I talk a lot about how this kind of music is just so influential on my taste in all of these different like spiraling ways. Like me getting into shoegaze is partly because of like Clams Casino and stuff like that. Like just learning to be into this really like atmosphere driven music and appreciating those aspects of production and all of that stuff. Like this is a big activation point for me music wise. And this song in particular, I remember so vividly, like when Toro became a guy, and like cool people I know were listening to this record, and like so many details in Rose Quartz particularly, like those were the songs, and this was like the album, like when people I knew were getting into this band. And so I just this album and this song has like a very specific feeling of me. I think I remember seeing him at like, I want to say it would have been like 2014 FYF, something like that. I could look it up, but yeah, just like a very,
that makes sense.
a very like early me going to festivals kind of vibe was Toro. Yeah, I think it was 2014.
Because I think he did Pitchfork that same year, so I imagine he was probably on the festival circuit.
The guy that we were about to talk about next, I believe, was also on that. No, not next.
Oh shit! Here he is finally. Oh god.
He's got that flow. He's got that flow.
Got it. Oh Jesus. It is times like this where I really am just like, man, I actually liked Haji Beats at one point. Embarrassing. But I think Toro was pretty smart. I mean, in this era especially, like to like latch on to like the Odd Future and Travis Scott. Like those are very lucrative people to tie yourself to.
No, totally. He did a really good job of, for his entire career all the way to now, being adjacent to a lot of different like scenes and waves without ever being like all the way tied into them in such a way that has allowed him to sustain. Because it's like when chillwave stopped happening, it didn't feel like, okay, now we've got to put Toro aside, because he never felt like he was always all the way just that. And like as music evolved in the 2010s, he was able to constantly, and not even in a way that felt like cynical, it just sort of felt like, oh, all of the things that he's pulling from are just all things that have sort of been in vogue at various points of the last 10 years. And he's done a really good job of just continuing to pivot his sound into places that make sense for the particular moment that he finds himself in. And I really just admire his career and the way he's managed, because I loved him at the time, but like I never would have thought like, oh yeah, Toro is someone that like I'd be listening to many years later, or like seeing at Pitchfork last year, seeing him play like the main stage for that many people. Like it was very cool.
It was a great set. Yeah. I mean, because that was somehow the first time I had seen him, even though I've been listening to Tori Moore for like 10 years.
And it was
almost.
a killer fucking set that he was playing
Great
on
set.
that show, where it was all of the new stuff that you wanted to hear, but also like a really good selection of stuff from throughout his career. And he did a thing that I really love, which is like when a band on stage has all of the musicians like all three of the musicians that weren't Toro were like maybe 6 feet away from him. Like they were all kind of like cramped together in the middle of the stage in just like a little like pile. And they were all just like kind of like looking at each other and like playing together. And it had this like fun little vibe.
I love it when the band makes eye contact. It's so intimate.
But yeah,
no. I'm not joking.
It's great. No, yeah, I really liked that, and I think that this song in general, like, I think of this early like Thundercat, Toro y Moi type of sound that became like really influential in all these different ways, and people from like Kendrick Lamar all the way to all kinds of people are going to start raiding this cabinet for like sounds and ideas. And I think like particularly the bass line and like the little synth part that starts the song, the do 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 do, that thing is just like instantly iconic moment. That's why I had to put the song on the playlist. Like that,
it's a great song.
That intro is just like what not all of these songs are necessarily teenage weed smoking memories, because like I was definitely a rabble-rousing kid, but not like a full-on stoner in high school. Like that phase did not come for me until now and later in life. Well, not even later, like just a little later than this, right? But I do have a couple of very crucial memories involving some of these songs in early weed smoking experiences. And this song is definitely one of those where like the second that intro comes on, I'm just sort of like teleported back to high school. In someone's
I do feel like that is kind of a overlying tenet of chillwave, is kind of like the 15-second cold open. They don't spend too much time like beating around the bush before they get into like the main beat or whatever.
And a lot of the time it has a very Clams Casino songs are really good at doing this. But like there's like a little 4 or 5 second intro that slams right into the beat in a way that is like a very satisfying moment. And that little like drop moment is kind of the moment of the song that like if you're using this in 2012 as your like vlog music or whatever, that's the moment that you're putting over like your friend's longboarding, whatever. Like that's the like satisfying little moment that grabs people in from the beginning of it.
Yeah. Great track. Michael, did you have any thoughts on the song, Michael?
I do, yeah. So I'm a huge Toro fan. Toro's obviously one of like the 3 pillars of chillwave. Back when we have the summer of chillwave in 2009, there's Toro, Neon Indian, and Washed Out. And of the 3 of them, and really everybody else who was tagged as chillwave, nobody's been able to make more of a career out of it than Toro. And I think, Jackie, you kind of speaked to how his music has evolved over time. And I think that's why Matty, so many details, that's on Toro's 3rd album. and already the sound of the music is far enough away from chillwave that you could make an argument either way for it.
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, I was definitely way more of a chillwave purist, but as the years have gone on, I've sort of relaxed. I guess, ironically enough, I've gotten more chill about the genre, and this to me is certainly within the confines of chillwave, even if it doesn't share the same lo-fi nature of the earliest works of the genre. I still think a lot of the hallmarks of that style of music are in here. And yeah, this is such a perfect song. I was never really a big weed smoker in high school either. I really started smoking heavily like the year after I graduated high school, but we were big hookah smokers in high school.
Oh yeah.
And
God.
Did you guys have the sub? I guess Michael, you're probably too old for it, but the subset of your friend who would go to the hookah bar on like a weekday because it's like 18 and plus, and they're just moving the pen around.
Max, I was about to say I was that friend. My hookah era was the era between me graduating high school and me getting like a being legal drinking age, because it was just like when we were home from the summer from college and wanted to hang out at somewhere that was not any of our parents' houses for an extended period of time and like not have to worry about like being hassled out of there or whatever, a hookah lounge is kind of the best place to do it.
You're making a good argument for it. We need more.
And there was one that was like near enough to my house in Pasadena that was like a chill enough place to hang out. But that's besides the point. No, yes, that is a crucial high school experience, passing around the.
Yeah, it's like how they talk about how there aren't like places for kids to like hang out anymore.
It's true.
There's no parks. Yeah. So if we don't have like the urban green space to build parks, more hookah lounges. There are worse ideas.
Max, this is why Steve Wallace exists, because like America doesn't have enough spaces for people to hang out, so he has to go camp in the sides of freeways.
Turning the woods behind a Home Depot into a green space, like, I mean, it because like okay, so
all right, time to move on.
We should not go down this rabbit hole.
There's so much. I will say before I move on to the next song, the worst date I've ever been on in my entire life did involve going to a hookah bar. So that's the when I think hookah bars, I think just the awful worstest vibes in the world. But not as bad vibes. Let's get back to good vibes, chill vibes. Shlohmo Places.
Well, from the album Bad Vibes, yes. This is
oh god damn it! I was trying to get out of the bad vibes.
Didn't even realize that.
Didn't realize. God damn it!
It's also funny because like this album being called Bad Vibes has such a different like tone to it now than it does then. You know, like a lot of stuff on this record is just like, in general, I think it's kind of a neat metaphor for the music where it's like I love this record still, but like I think what was mind-blowing to me about it at the time has now aged into being a little more commonplace because of like. We now live in a post like chill hip hop beat society and relaxed to universe. So I love all of Shlohmo's later stuff so much that like he is one of my favorite. He's probably my favorite artist on this playlist and like one of my favorite artists ever. I'm a huge fan of pretty much every era of his work, and he is really my entryway to a lot of this different stuff because he comes from Los Angeles from this record label called We Did It. I'm wearing my We Did It sweatshirt right now. I have a lot of We Did It merch. But like I was just a huge fan of them, being a kid that liked electronic music but was also looking for some stuff within electronic that was like a little less like aggro. I told a story on the Endless Scroll bonus episode I went on to talk about Bloghouse about going to a rave and how like there'd be people who would leave the rave after hearing aggressive electronic music for 12 hours and then would like get in the car and put on like more dubstep in the parking lot. And I even when I was like still actively on drugs, I would never want to continue like bombarding myself like that. I wanted to take the aux cord and play like come down music. And Shlohmo has always been in my rotation of come down music. Like for my entire his music means a lot to me sentimentally, and is also very influential to like what I care about in terms of the sense of mood and the sense of kind of the artificiality of how he's playing with the vocals, but then like all of the really natural textures. Like this record focuses a lot on all of these kind of found sound scratches and clicks and like all of this percussion stuff that feels not like drums and snares, but feels very kind of organic, and like just how the texture and the mood can communicate so much without any lyrics and without any like actual real song structure besides just like a basic kind of beat that has a structure to it but also has a kind of off kilter like wobble to it. And I think his most recent record, The End, comes back to a lot of those textural elements but like does them in a more impressive way. But I think this is none of that other Shlohmo music qualifies as chillwave. Like, it gets a lot darker and sadder and more like kind of haunted after this. And I think Places is the ultimate example of him kind of in his just like really peaceful, melancholic, but really like comforting, warm atmosphere. And this song is really sentimentally important to me in ways that I probably won't be able to communicate on this podcast, but it's fine because I love this album artist. I love all Shlohmo stuff. He's great.
Yeah, it isn't a song I have any connection with, but it sounds like a song that I feel like I could have a lot of attached nostalgia to if it was a song that I was to have heard back in 2013 or 2014. And I'm driving my car off a little bit of weed and sad.
Do you understand me more in general after hearing this song? Because I feel like a lot of times when I show people a lot of Shlohmo's music, they're like, oh, I get the everything about you now.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I already kind of got that, but like, yes, I do understand how it could be like unlocking a sort of key.
Foundational.
Yeah, exactly.
The meme.
Yeah, I'm not someone who like listens to, I mean, I guess I listen to a lot of chillwave adjacent stuff. I just listen to chill music in general, regardless of what form it is. So I understand the vibe. Like, I guess similar to the friend who's in the hookah bar, the friend who is like posting stories of them driving to like EDM in high school. I think I've brought this archetype up on the podcast before, but
absolutely.
I understand the appeal of festivals, but the idea of casually listening to like aggressive like bass music, I guess, is just
it's a lot. I've been trying to dip your toes in the water, but Max just does not listen to music that can be described as like bangers in almost any capacity. Like
I'll call them bangers though.
You'll call an Adrian Lenker acoustic song a banger, but like
but an actual banger, nope. Just it doesn't phase him.
Before I ramble more about any like Shlohmo or We Did It stuff, I would want to hear Matty and Michael. What do you guys think of this song?
I'll let Michael take the floor here. I'll let Michael go first on this one. I don't have a whole lot of thoughts.
I like this song. No, I can't say that I've followed Shlohmo's career in the same way that you have, Jackie, but I definitely remember this record coming out and spending a lot of time with it. Like I was saying earlier with the brain feeder scene, this is a style of music where if you don't think it's chillwave, it's like not that far out there from something that might be chillwave. Like you think of Bath's music. I know we're going to talk about a Bath song later in this playlist. You know, really those two songs on paper or even listening to them, they're not all that different.
Totally. And I also think that like around this time, you also have, in addition to this record and the other couple EPs and stuff that We Did It guys were putting out around this time, they were doing a lot of remixes. And I think in a lot of like the early Shlohmo remix stuff, I was going through a bunch of those the other day, and he has like a sort of chopped and screwed remix of I'm On One by Drake And if you listen to stuff like that, you can hear, I think, a lot more of the kind of sample, reverb heavy, chill wave sort of vibe in the stuff that he was doing kind of adjacent to the mainline project stuff. But yeah, I totally get you that it is definitely adjacent more than it is like canonical down the line, like capital C chill wave. But I do.
Are there like a couple albums that came out in like, I don't know, 2007, 2008 that were like, oh,
I
these
mean,
are the chillwave albums? Or
there are a couple of them, and some of them we're going to talk about
okay.
on this episode, I would say, yes. I also wanted to include this song. I originally, as I said, the playlist was slightly different before I merged it with Alex's playlist. So I originally had, I think, maybe even 2 Shlohmo songs on here, but I had more We Did It representation in general, and I just wanted to shout out Deej particularly is the other artist of We Did It who is very great and had an EP around this time that is very much of this ilk, like the chillest thing, Tide songs that he put out in 2013, that is very much in this sort of lane, but he's gone in a very different path since then. But I think of all of this stuff, like listening to this song always reminds me of people like Spooky Black and the kind of alt R&B stuff that comes out of this period, and eventually like it comes all the way full circle enough where eventually by the end of this decade, Shlohmo is getting additional production credits on a Drake album, and like now like the alt R&B people that were pulling from this kind of sampley psychedelic music like The Weeknd eventually turn around and start working with these beat electronic guys. And Shlohmo is someone that has had sort of that career path. He doesn't have a ton of he doesn't have as many credits as I think he should. I really want to see him work with more people, but he has like a bunch of credits for Joji on that one album of his that some people like. He did some stuff with Tory Lanez before Tory Lanez was canceled a long time ago, but like does a lot of that kind of.
There's a bunch of Shlohmo Jeremiah songs. I love those.
Those are all really, really good. Yes. There's a lot of How to Dress Well collaborations. I think we brought that up on the episode of Best New Pod we did about How to Dress Well. But yeah, Shlohmo just has a lot of connections to a lot of guys that are very important to me. And We Did It was like the first record label that I was ever like, I am not only a fan of this record label, but like I'm going to wear the merchandise of this record label, you know? And so they're always going to have a very sentimental place in my heart. But I especially this song, like I have specific memories I can immediately pull of like being in the back of a bus on the way to our youth and government retreat and like playing this song on like a speaker. I'm there instantly when I hear this song.
Were you on student government, Jackie?
I did through the YMCA. They have like a mock government trial thing where you would basically go to meetings like once a week, and then once a year you would go to like a conference for 4 days and do.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's different from the student leadership I was thinking of.
No. Yes, I was never like student council president.
I was about to say student council core music sounds very different from that.
No. It was fun because it was like half of the people there were like, I'm going to go be a lobbyist one day. And the other half of people were kind of goofing off. And then there's some gray area in between. And that's where I was.
Yeah. The lobbyist, and you look at the job board out of college and it's $22,000 a year.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff.
Anyways,
let's move on.
We're like not as far along as I thought we would be, but let's keep moving. I could talk about Shlohmo all day. This next one is, I think for me, this is the first artist here we've gotten to that is like, maybe he's done stuff since then. He is trapped in this period of time for me, and this is xxyyxx with his most popular song from his most popular EP, About You. And this song is one that, like I was saying with the last one, but even more so, like this really takes me back, especially because this guy isn't around anymore, and also that the sound of this feels very, very of its moment. I don't think in a bad way, but just like, I remember this song being like a whoa moment as a teenager, and now that I just like know more about like electronic music, I tend to use like magic as like a metaphor for music a lot of the time, because I feel like it's like the more I learn about how the stuff works and like how to make music and things like that. Like some of these songs that used to be like mind-blowing to me, they start to lose their magic when you sort of know how the sausage is made. It's like, well, this isn't really like that. Like you can kind of hear just like, oh, I get what this is doing, and it's not really doing that much special. But I remember a time when this was like really, really immersive and like mind-blowing. And I think a really good test of like music is like if you can learn more and it still feels just as special. Like there are songs on this playlist that still create that atmosphere so well that like even though I know what it's doing, I like don't care. I get like lost in it even anyways. And this song is like right on the edge where on one hand I could easily be like, this sounds a little dated and thin now, but I kind of like that it sounds that way. Like it sounds dated in a way that's very comforting to me personally.
Mm-hmm. And also you gotta remember, like, because I mean I found this out. I mean, xxyyxx, born in 1995, so he was only 17 when this came out. So wow. It's like,
oh yeah.
So that like the more minimalist style kind of makes sense, where it's like, well, yeah, he's a young producer.
Oh, totally. Like, yeah, he was just like a right place at the right time, kind of. And this particular EP was just like a huge moment. I remember. I mean, like as we're talking about, this is kind of Michael was identifying well that the like real peak chillwave moment was like 2009, 2010, the summer of chillwave is called it. But this is more like the kind of post chillwave universe we've entered into, where things are splintering in all these different directions, which is where I get into this music is like 2011, 2012, 2013. But I think that this was another one that just like, when I think about the music that my friends who smoked weed in high school listened to, stuff like this. I do love when he finally gives you an actual other synthesizer. It's like, the restraint does kind of pay off, I think.
I listened to this playlist on the way to the gym this morning, and I guess at the gym as well. And this is about where I like made the assertion that this music, for the most part, without like a ton of prior experience and nostalgia associated with it, is just like a primarily background kind of enjoyment for me. It's hard for me to like engage with it really, and that might be like my history of just kind of smoking weed to this kind of music.
Well, I think that's totally, I mean, this thing is like what it's doing with the vocal is very interesting, and then he loops it for 4 minutes, and by like the third minute you're like, okay, I get what you're doing here, and then eventually he gives you the payoff of the synth. But it's like it's hard to stay actively engaged with it, even if you're like really locked into every little kind of minute detail of the production. It's hard to actively listen to. It's totally, yeah. I also like the first couple of tracks on this EP are all really good. DMT is much more of a straightforwardly Clams Casino ripoff type thing, but I think this is the one that always to me felt the most distinctive of his shtick. But yeah, do we have anything else to say about this guy or this song? Not really.
I got nothing.
You do?
Oh, Michael did. All right, Michael, go off.
I hate this song. I'll just throw it out. I've always hated this song. As somebody who like was very plugged into chillwave in 2009 when it first started happening, by the time like this song appeared, it just felt like we'd already done it. You know, there were already so many other artists who had perfected this type of sound. And I think even to a certain extent, this song just sounded like a sanded down version of a style of music that meant a lot to me. And so it makes sense this song would be, for people who are younger than me, like this would be your gateway or one of the gateway songs into this scene.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely think it hasn't held up super well for me. Like it's definitely not one of the better songs or artists. And I think it does have like not an amateurish quality, but just sort of a real like, it doesn't feel like it's got more than a couple ideas to, and because all of the music is very slow in its pacing, it doesn't feel like there's enough development going on in here to really justify how long it takes.
Yeah. Before we move on to our next song, though, I this is something I want to mention / play really quick because it's pretty crazy. Of course, chillwave. People say that it was invented in 2000. 2009 is kind of when the term was coined. But if you go all the way back to 1970, the Beach Boys, they kind of invented chillwave with this song. All I Want to Do. I just want to play it really briefly because it's a great song, and also like, holy shit, this sounds so much like chillwave.
Into the Beach Boys, it should
of course, I mean, again.
No, you're right. I'm just, it's very on brand.
Beach Boys are, I would say, are of course a core to most pop music, but definitely chillwave. You can't tell me this doesn't sound like a rudimentary version of like the early Neon Indian stuff or like the early Toro stuff.
No,
definitely sounds like Neon Indian, yeah. But yeah, I
just want to play that really briefly before we go to our next song.
Oh yeah,
because I have nothing to say about our next song really, which is Small Black, Photojournalist.
Yeah, this is one that I knew about Small Black, but Small Black is one of the artists on this list that I would say I got into later when I started seeing people in the past 5 years or so start doing like chillwave retrospectives and Ian Cohen and people doing playlists of chillwave stuff, and Small Black was one of those like, oh, it seems like I should have been listening to this at the time, but I guess I just wasn't. And this is one of those songs that when I heard it, I was like, oh fuck, I wish I had heard this in high school. I would have been losing my goddamn mind. This is I think this song is great.
This song is excellent. This song fucking rules.
Yeah,
I'm glad it's on here.
Hell yeah. I think it really just like, it's the perfect stepping stone between like the Passion Pit type indie pop that's going on at this time and chillwave, like grounding it in a little bit more of that kind of washed out feeling so that it doesn't feel quite as like sugary sweet as like an MGMT does, but it's got that same kind of psychedelic atmosphere and the poppiness and the sort of propulsion that a lot of this, especially coming after About You, which is like such a slog, like this is just like a very bright upbeat song in the best way.
The song kind of reminds me of like The Naked and Famous, but I think it does something which I wish The Naked and Famous did in retrospect, which is kind of like turn up that washed out meter a little bit more.
No, it's like it's got the same sort of that like car commercial indie pop appeal, but it has a lot more kind of textural nuance as opposed to being like a very clean take on it. Yeah. And that's sort of what happens with this music is like it's very cool for a little bit, and then like a lot of it just quickly funnels into like car commercial music, essentially, as we documented in that series. Like you get a lot of these bands either going in a different direction or these bands just being farmed for ideas by less creative and less musically interesting bands. But yeah, this is a really great little tune. I also like the song that this is a single, a front back single with. Sun Was High, So Was I. That's also a very good song. Small Black's cool. I definitely should. I want to check out that 2021 album of his that I saw people talking about at the time, because
it's pretty good actually.
I dig. I had heard some of this before, but I've been digging back into this early stuff in preparation for this episode, and was just like, yeah, this is all really cool.
Have you heard the Moonkiller mixtape by Small Black?
Not.
I would recommend you check that out. That's really fantastic. And Despicable Dogs by them. If you read any of the chillwave retrospectives that were written, I think almost all of them feature that song on there. That's kind of like a staple of the genre. Mm-hmm. And also the washed out remix of Despicable Dogs is a classic.
Yeah, the washed out Small Black double remix, where Small Black remixes, you'll see it, and washed out.
Yes, it's fucking incredible.
Really great.
Yeah, I mean, I like the track. I don't love it as much as y'all do. I do like it, but I do think like we're already seeing like in some ways like what these bands end up becoming post chillwave. There's like I would say there's like two or three. I'd say there's like 3 or 4 trajectories that all these bands they kind of pick one and go with it. Small Black were definitely in the. You could already kind of tell they were sort of pivoting to more of like the 80s synth pop revival that was kind of also like beginning to pop up post chillwave. Like that's like okay, we're gonna pivot to this just because like okay, the chillwave thing is dying out. Let's we're getting more professional, yada yada. 80 cent pop, let's do that. Which could have been lucrative, but I think this is I mean they're a band that took a long break, right? Like there was a pretty long break between like their
they put
most
out
recent album and the current
a
one.
2013 record and a 2015 record, and then they took a break for a while before coming back with a 2021 record. I've always thought like it's so funny that like so much of some of these can be the album art, because like I look at this and like first couple of EPs and this EP art, and it's like, oh yeah, this is definitely like the album artwork that matches what this music is. And then you see the Limits of Desire album cover. I don't know, Matty, if you've seen that. You should pull it up right now.
The Limits of Desire.
Terrible album art.
Oh, like, that's awful.
Absolutely awful. And it's just an immediate like. I think everything about that album artwork just tells you how a couple of years into this, I think kind of as Michael was identifying, by the time that like high school me was getting into all of this music, it was already becoming diffuse in such a way, and it was already becoming past its moment in such a way that like people I don't think had a real clear sense of like, oh, this is how we like. There was a moment where it was all flowing in one direction and everyone was like tapping into it, and like the rising tide was lifting all boats. And then by 2013 people are like, do I do this, do I do that? And I think for people that didn't like pick a lane and stick with it, it became really hard for these acts to like keep going. I think that's what happened to Small Black, is it's like you see that album cover and it's just like, what are you trying to tell us that you are now? Like it's very bad at communicating that.
Also, they're naked. Ew, that's gross, nasty.
I
gross.
would never do that.
This is a Lord Solar Power school of put some damn pants on your album cover.
Oh God, let's move on unless we had any lingering thoughts on Small Black, because Jackie, I do want to get your take on why, like on this song, both because like I'm like, is Baths a chillwave artist? I wouldn't consider Baths chillwave, but
I wouldn't. I think this song is essential to this style of music that we're talking about and this moment. And I think this particular Baths album has a reputation separate from Baths' career post then, as became a topic of discussion on Twitter.com, which we don't need to get into.
I side with Ted Davis. That's all I'll say on the matter.
They also, it's not a beef anymore. They talk to each other.
The beef has been squashed, but still, it's a Ted Davis. It's a Ted Davis Tuesday when this comes out on all of our all of Spotify and shit.
Amen to that.
See, Twitter's crazy because any given day people argue. Like, I like Baths, but like, I don't know anything about the drama. I don't really care about it.
We can't get into it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, but it's just like, it's just wild that like, oh yeah, there was an argument about Baths today. That's like, what's next? The wild world of the internet. Anything's possible.
Aminals, though, this song in particular, I think, kind of getting back to what I was talking about a little bit with Shlohmo, like the off-kilter beat being juxtaposed with these very like cute but also very atmospheric, dreamy, bright sort of sounds. Like I think it represents sort of one of the different like ideas that was happening around this time that then sort of metastasized into something else. And even though Bath's career goes in a very different direction than the sound of this particular record, not very different, I think this record does demonstrate a lot of like the quirks and sort of attributes that Bath's music maintains throughout, but this particular form of it is the only time I would sort of say that he was particularly chillwave adjacent, and really just this song in particular I think has an outsized effect of giving him that association. Matty, do you have what's your relationship with Baths?
I listened to the Ocean Death EP when it came out, and I really liked that EP. And I have not listened to a lot of Baths since then, which is a big kind of a blind spot. Knowing I know Rose is a big Baths fan, and of course our friend Ted Davis loves this record. So I feel like one of these days I'll amend things, and I'll actually give a listen to the Baths discog. But I do like this track. I do like it. I like the song. It's good. I like it. Yeah. It was just like a bit. It was just weird to see Baths on here, just because I was like, oh, like chillwave. Like
he's not someone that you would associate with this sort of thing, but this song in particular has.
I would say his side project kind of dips into this kind of music a fair bit. I wouldn't say Geodic, for the most part, is chillwave, but I think it is kind of similar in its shimmery, kind of very light, easy listening.
And I think this song in particular,
bouncy.
A lot of chillwave pulls from late 90s, early 2000s electronic acts like Boards of Canada and stuff like that is like this very psychedelic beat music. And I think this song is a really great example of like how people were updating that sound in the early 2010s. It's like, let's take that same kind of like childhood nostalgia feeling from those Boards of Canada records, but give it this like kind of brighter new sheen, as opposed to it being this kind of dusty, musty 90s electronic sound. And I think I think for that reason, this song to me feels like an interesting connection point between a lot of the stuff that was happening during this period of time. Michael, what do you think of this song?
I love this song. I'm a huge fan of this record. I think, in my opinion, the most chillwave song in Bath's discography is Hall, but I think maybe it speaks to Bath's proximity to the genre, especially back in 2010, how multiple songs on here can be perceived as chillwave, and I think correctly so. Like a song like Maximalist, is that not chillwave? I think it is.
I think it qualifies. I think Maximalist was that one that you definitely could do, and I think that there were some artists that were clearly like very self-conscious of the wave that was going on around them and like trying to capitalize on that. And then there are some artists where it's just like the stuff that they were interested in and pulling from just so happened to like have a natural synergy with this wave that was going on at the time. And those tended to be the ones that lasted longer, like Toro, like, right? Like all the things Toro was pulling from were not necessarily like an attempt to capitalize on. It's like he started the wave in part by being like, well, I'm really into this and this and that. And Baths has a similar sort of record collector sound to his music, where there's always a lot of different like influences and textures. And I think this record particularly was like really impressive, the way that it played with that, like the way that this song takes that up tempo like dance music burst in the back half. Like this song, I think more than a lot of songs of this era, but even more so than a lot of songs in this album, like feels very of our current moment. Like I really feel like I could imagine this being an instrumental for like a song that could come out now. You know what I mean? Like Caro Benito could put out a song like with this as the instrumental like tomorrow, and I wouldn't bat an eye, you know?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really good point. Also, shout out Ted Davis. I got to make sure to get that in there. I'm in a group chat with Ted. Ted, if you're out there listening, or if somebody's listening and you know Ted, let him know he's loved.
Hell yeah. I feel like Ted will be listening to this. As happened recently, in this episode being the perfect conduit, I've recently realized more than before that Ted and I just like had the same high school music experience, being like really into Shlohmo and Spooky Black, etc. Like we diverged in the woods in that I've always been more into like aggro dance music than Ted. Ted never gets above a light ambient house thump, but I love Ted, and we do have a lot in common in terms of our foundational musical texts.
Yeah. But now, folks, stand and rise for the what I would say is the chillwave national anthem.
I would say
It's
so too.
feel it all around, washed out.
I do not like this song.
Really?
No, I recognize it, and I've heard the song before, and I thought it was fine. I think back in the day, but I heard it today, and maybe it was just because I was at the gym or something. Thank you. Michael is standing up and
Okay, we gotta
saluting.
stand and rise.
Hat off. Yeah, I'll give you a salute. I'll give you the scout salute.
This is the chillwave song. Like
Yeah.
when people think of chillwave, this is the song you should be thinking of.
I understand why it is important, and I hear the sound, but I hear this song and I just want to turn it off.
I understand only in that, like, if you had no experience or familiarity with the song before this, I could understand hearing it and just thinking of like all of the various like vaporwavy, like, it just sounds like music that like a YouTuber would put over a transition now if you don't have the specific familiarity with it of the time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like I can understand coming to it fresh now and being like, this is really boring or not interesting.
The vocals are weirdly grating to me.
That's interesting.
Like, I don't like the vocals.
I
don't
do,
like the effects that were added to them.
Those are fine.
There's a lot of chorus effect in addition to the reverb, I think, is what you're rubbing up against. But I like this song. I don't know. I think that washed out in a lot of ways, not only the song, but is just like, yeah, the prototypical chillwave artist, I would say, more than anyone else on this list. Because even like Small Black and Neon Indian, there's elements of the sort of synth poppy stuff going on there, and this has elements of that, but this is really just like, I think, so singular in how it synthesized a lot of these ideas, and also how it set the template for like even the visual presentation of chillwave. Like this EP cover of the woman in the ocean is just like that set the vibe so much for what the aesthetics of this whole movement would be. And I think that it's hard to pick an artist and a song more representative of what this episode represents than this one.
This song really was a vibe shift, to use that term. I don't know. I was kind of trying to think, like, when chillwave came about, why did it hit me so hard as a 16-year-old? And looking back on it in like 2009, I think my most recent game console was a Nintendo 64. I played a lot of Mario Kart. I played a lot of GoldenEye. I was really big into Tim and Eric. Awesome show. Great job. So this like nostalgic lo-fi style of music, like, of course it's just going to hit me like a fucking semi-truck on impact and sound like the coolest shit in the world to me.
Totally. I think that's dead on. I think that's such a big thing for a lot of people of our ages and younger, is like having reference points for a lot of these sounds that come from these like weird other places that like infiltrated our childhood, sort of. Like I think about like how a lot of this music sounds like the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, or like the fact that a lot of people are into drum and bass music now because there were a lot of like PS2 games in 2002 that had like drum and bass music on the soundtrack, and now what used to be kind of subcultural is now like everyone likes that shit now because they all played it on like whatever SSX Tricky.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, that's the one.
I think that I think that with this song in particular, I think that that's totally like, there is something to the sort of vibey retro sound that, and I think you're right about it being that this came out in 2009. This is a perfect example of someone just like feeling the winds in the air and being like, I'm calling my shot. Like, this is where we're going, and totally nailing it. To the point that almost it's like, there's sort of a dead endness to his career in a certain way, of just like, he was so prototypical of a moment in time that eventually that moment of time is going to pass. And even though you can see the ripple effects, like I think that this style of music in general, but particularly Washed Out's music, you can see ripple effects in indie for the next several years. MGMT, bands like Beach Fossils, Real Estate. We're going to even talk about Wild Nothing in a second. Like all of these sorts of bands in indie rock that are leaning on chiller, more atmospheric, laid back sort of soundscapes. I think this record played such a big part in like setting the tone for them. But then as those other bands ran with that baton, eventually Washed Out was just going to be like
Washed Out would be washed.
Being named Washed Out is such a big part of it. You know what I mean? Like the fact that his name is like a self-description of the music does have this effect of sort of like it makes him the king of chillwave while also making him sort of stuck in chillwave land.
The dunce of chillwave. The king has no pants.
Is that the expression, Max? The king has no pants?
Exactly.
Probably not.
Exactly.
It doesn't sound right.
The emperor has no clothes, perhaps.
No, it's the king has no pants. That's what we're gonna call it now. Emperor has no clothes. It's the king has no pants. The king has no trousers.
Do we have any other more general Washed Out thoughts?
I want to mention with Washed Out, his record from 2017, Mr. Mellow on Stone's Throw, is pretty good. Especially the tracks Get Lost and Hard to Say Goodbye are really great songs. And it was him kind of trying to make the pivot to the more like Stone's Throw electronic aesthetic. Yeah. And it didn't really take all that well. So he ended up just going back to like
80. I remember this cover, yeah.
And then like in 2020, he just put out, we went back to Sub Pop and put out like basically just like an 80s synth pop record. And it's So he's one of the many guys that just decided just to pivot to the more synth pop stuff.
I think any other artist, if you go to his Spotify page or whatever and pull up his album arts, you can track the development of graphic design and album cover design throughout the entire 2010s perfectly with all of his artwork. Like all of it is pretty good. Some of it is aged better than others, but every single piece of album art is like a perfect document of what was cool or like hip or like trendy at the time. So like the 2009 Life of Leisure EP, The Woman in the Water, and then you've got High Times,
observation, Jackie.
Also like 2009, and then you get the 2011 cover, which is the vibe shift toward like two-door cinema vibes, where you've got like a hot couple making out in bed, and you've got the like serifed white font on top of it. Like I don't like that cover, but that cover is like so
very Abercrombie and Fitch ad.
But was then, head out.
And then 2 years later, they pivoted from Abercrombie and Fitch ad to Paracosm, which is like H&M. It literally looks like an H&M advertisement, like the thing you would like get in the mail that would say like 25% off like it is.
Spend your coal bucks now.
Definitely not one of their better covers. But then like Mr. Mellow feels very 2017. It's very like pre-Flower Boy sort of quirky, late 2010s sort of colorful.
The internet,
post Odd Future colorful vibes we've now shifted into. Dramatic shift from the last record. And then the 2020 record is so like muted sunset purples. Like I think you can really
sharp edges.
You can tell that he's like a guy that cares a lot about this, because he's really clearly catering the visual look of each record to like what's going on at the time. Like this is a man concerned with aesthetics first and foremost. You can hear it in the music, you can hear it, you can just see it all over this project. But I think it's very considered, and I think that's the thing that like this movement is kind of about. It's like, yes, it's just kind of this like veneer and aesthetic and like just sort of ambiance, but like what if we spent a lot of time caring and tinkering with said aesthetic, and what if we can work so hard on it that we create something that actually ends up feeling profound or like deep in some way. And I think that's like the sort of goal of chillwave as a genre.
Finding love in a hopeless place, if you will.
Exactly. finding love in lo-fi beats to chill and relax to.
Oh God! All right. Any final thoughts on Washed Out and on this song? Or are we ready to move on?
Let's move on to a song that's, this is, I think we can be quick with this because this kind of ties into what we're talking about here with like the indie rock stuff. This is Chinatown by Wild Nothing. And this is not a band I would at all describe as chillwave, but when I was like looking at chillwave playlists, I saw this song in a lot of them, and I think this is the only song of theirs that I kind of would qualify in that way. And I think this might have been on Alex's playlist, but
I think it was. Yeah.
yeah. And so I included this for that reason. I think it's like the exact kind of synthesis of like what I'm talking about, that dreamy indie rock sound that sort of births out of this, and the chill wave sound that he's clearly pulling from on this record. Like the difference between this record and the 2012 record is pretty apparent. Like the 2012 record Nocturne is a bigger record.
Chronological?
No, it is not.
Okay. No.
But the 2012 Nocturne, that's like he pivots to this very dreamy guitar sound that's much more of the 2010s than like this, which feels much more like of the turn of the decade. Like this feels of like the kind of deer hunter indie world, I would say, and like taking that and mashing it up with kind of a chill wavy electronic sound. I like this song. It's pretty nice.
I do not care for the song. I know people ride for Wild Nothing. I know they ride for this record. But it's not for me. This is like borderline, like landfill indie synth pop revival. Like I never really got into like the real, like the indie rock reaction to chillwave, like that stuff, like Real Estate, Wild Nothing, etc.
Beach Fossils guy?
Never was a Beach Fossils guy. Just could not get into that set. I mean, maybe now that I've more of a shoegaze head, maybe I would come back to it and find more to appreciate. But like,
you're
listening to this, I'm just like, man, this is just not.
I have the answer. You need to go listen to the Beach Fossils cover of Agony by Young Lean. Just listen to that song over and over again, and then I think eventually you'll get it.
Okay, I trust your word here.
We're putting Matty in the Chillwave Rehabilitation Center.
I love Beach Fossils, but I also like. I have a lot of fondness for that particular sound, and I've liked that. Like I'm hearing now in music, certain bands like reclaim certain aspects of it and try to put it toward maybe more musically interesting ends. I'm blanking on what I'm thinking right now, but there was something recently. The Ben Stellar EP that I heard last year, I really liked that, and it had kind of a darker version of this sort of a sound. But I think in general, a lot of it feels a lot more disposable, like you're saying, than it did at the time. Like I didn't include Youth Lagoon on this, and now actually that I'm thinking about it, I probably should have included a Youth Lagoon song instead of this song. But I think that is in a similar sort of wheelhouse of like very washed out, dreamy indie rock of this era. And I don't think Wild Nothing were ever my favorite, but I do feel like they are pretty emblematic of a lot of the different things going on this time.
I agree. I mean, even if I don't like it, I do know that like, this is definitely like should be considered a part of like what was going on at the time. And
if you look at the related artists, like
it's all the chillwave guys.
It specifically demonstrates the intersection of chillwave and indie rock, because you've got Dive in here, you've got Deer Hunter in here, you've got like Real Estate, and you got like Craft Spells and Small Black and Lower Dens and Neon Indian, like the perfect Venn diagram intersection of what was going on in indie rock. But I even still like I don't like this song. I still think it's better than like, not to just throw them under the bus, but like The Pains of Being Pure at Heart, for example, of something I don't think is quite as enjoyable.
Oh God, this. That fucking God! You're making me remember that when we discussed that song on Bestie
That's
Pod,
what I'm saying. Is that when you lobby the word landfill indie, you have to actually go back and listen to stuff that really deserves that, and then go back and listen to the thing you're lobbying it and decide if you're being fair.
Yeah, I guess that's why I said borderline. It's like that if I'm feeling like really mean, I would say that, but I'm not feeling particularly mean tonight. So, but it feels like borderline close to me at times, which is a scary feeling. But
there was just a tweet about this. I need to pull it. someone tweeted about some diss that someone had for the pains of being pure at heart. It was like the pains of being boring or something like that. I'm gonna here it is. It was that there was a tweet, someone saying, remembering the time I pissed off Bradford Cox, and he said that my band was going to be the tapes and tapes of chillwave. That was Martin Courtney, and then Ian Cohen replied to that and said, might be even more vicious than that time Jay Retard said, more like the pains of being boring at heart.
So, Jay Retard said that of all people. That rocks. That rocks. Michael, did you have any thoughts?
No, not really.
Okay.
I had like way more of an appetite for this style of music when it was happening than I do now. Of all the like chill wave leaning indie rock, When I'm With You by Best Coast is that's a song for me, which is not on the playlist, so I wanted to shout it out. But yeah, I mean, I kind of bought into the real estate hype, and I loved the first Youth Lagoon album, but some of that
Youth
music
Lagoon's back, by the way. They're back.
Yeah, I know. I'm super excited.
So yeah, my job's working that record to radio. I'm amped.
It is, I think, the right time, and I think the fact that Youth Lagoon are coming back, and the fact that of all of these bands, the one that feels like they have stood the test of time the best is by far Dive. I think that is identifying that there's not as much of a lane for like the really stripped back twee sort of approach to dream pop, and now it's like, okay, if you're doing this now, either make full like ambient music or you're making shoegaze now. Like there's not a lot of bands now that are doing just like very stripped back, plain real estate type guitar stuff. Like I think it makes sense that Youth Lagoon would be the one that comes back, because I think that they were always a little more hazy and psychedelic than some of these other bands.
Yeah, and also I feel like Wild Nothing, like again, some of his collaborations in recent years, he's been smart to kind of pivot, kind of being more of like a songwriter producer guy. Like he was on the I'm looking at it right now. I'm just gonna hit play on it just so I can, the Molly Birch track.
He worked with Japanese Breakfast on.
Has Molly Birch been cooking
recently? What about Molly Birch, Max?
Has she been cooking recently?
I mean, she had this record in 2021.
There I go talking about artists I could never make a banger, and I'm going to say Molly Birch is going to make a banger.
It's very funny seeing like 4 million plays, and then the rest of the album is like lucky to even hit like over 100K on some of these songs. And then I think Jack from Wild Nothing, I think, did work on Be Sweet, which is a great song. But
let me pull up.
I feel like there's been a lot of Japanese breakfast revisionism that's been starting to happen. I don't know if I like it.
What do you mean revisionism?
I feel like people are. I don't know. I feel like maybe she's just been in the press circuit for so long now that people are starting to tire of her. And
I mean, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, when you're promoting like an album and a book at the same time, and that book tour is kind of going
the book, and she hasn't reached like Phoebe levels of overexposure, but there is absolutely nothing cool or interesting about liking Japanese Breakfast now. And whenever you reach that point, people are just gonna look for ways to like pick at whatever, because it's like there's nothing interesting about saying like Michelle Zauner is cool and good and talented and we like her, which was our beat. Like that was our whole thing for a while. Exactly. They copied our whole fucking flow. But
let's move on.
Let's not get into Japanese Breakfast.
Yeah, let's not get in the hole here. Let's move on to Lapalux. Don't mean a thing.
Yeah, this is
Lapalux. Sorry, my bad.
This is the other brain feeder artist of this playlist. Although I never associated this as much with brain feeder directly at the time. Like I kind of vaguely knew it was, and later sort of put that together. But Lapalux, I think, is like just the sort of the more textured version of what you're hearing on like the xxyyxx track. Like this feels like taking that, and it's like, what if this was done by someone that could actually flesh it out and make it a very kind of rich. I really love this record, and I enjoy Lapalux's career in general, but this one specifically is just like, I don't know, it scratches a really nice itch again of being like in between the kind of Flying Lotus stuff and the chillwave beat scene stuff. I don't really have much to say about it because a lot of the stuff I would say about it is kind of covered by other tracks in this playlist. This was the kind of last remnant of the original, more personal version of this playlist, and I just love this song in particular so much. I think the way that the vocal sample is incorporated is really effective in giving it kind of an emotional heft to it. Not quite like burial levels of like making it really like emotionally pungent, but it does have a little bit of that kind of moody atmosphere to it, and I just really love the that like wobbling synth line. This is just like a song I just think about immediately when I think about this style of music.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that you didn't clock this as brain feeder at first, because I clocked it right away. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, this
sounds like brain feeder. Yeah, I mean, it does.
Which is, it's just like, I mean, like, I'm not, of course, once again, I don't know shit about music theory, but like, what is it like with these, like, the brain feeder acts and having like that specific sound? Like, is it like the side, like, from what I know is like, it's like, is it side chaining, like weird like compression stuff? Is it just
part
like
of it is
working
how
on Ableton?
The drums,
like,
a lot of it is how the drums sound. Yes, I think like there's certain aspects of music of this era of the. I think we talked about this a little bit actually on the Dance Craze Songs episode. Like when a lot of these softwares and things were relatively new, there were just sort of certain limitations and constraints to the palette of things, or like certain like lots of, because all of these different digital audio workspaces use like different plugins. Earlier on, there were less of those different plugins that people now use, like Serum and stuff, that have a lot more like creative range in terms of the kinds of sounds you can create digitally. And so with a lot of these like niche electronic scenes or like waves of like rap production in this period of time, there's a lot of like very specific texture like things that you can just sort of recognize, or like ways of producing that sort of have like a sort of dated quality to them because of the way that like technology has sort of advanced. But I think in particular there are some things, like I do think some of it is the way that it's like kind of compressed and mixed, but I think a lot of it is just the way that the drums sound. Like that is such a big part of it, is that it's incorporating these digital production techniques with very classic MPC beat making, where the difference between doing a sequence beat versus a beat that you're making on an MPC is that because you're actually having to hit the pads on the MPC to create the rhythm, as opposed to like just like planning them out on a map, it has that human feel to the beat. Like it doesn't feel like the beat is like this like monotonous robot. It has like that kind of stumble and shifting constantly. Like it doesn't feel like it's quite landing on the spot, but it's close enough that it sort of keeps you, and there's like that little bit of like tension that's created by that. And that's something that's a signature of Madlib and Jay Dilla, and they talk a lot about it in the book Dilla Time, like the way that he would sort of like manipulate the feeling of time in records by playing something a little fast or a little slow, and like the tension that's created in the percussion there. And I think that's like what you hear when you turn the song on, and immediately your brain goes like Flying Lotus, brain feeder, because like he is so indebted to that style of beat making that anyone else who's pulling from it, even if they're kind of taking it in a slightly different direction, like you're just going to recognize that immediately because it stands out, and it's part of what made Flying Lotus and this whole scene like feel novel and feel very refreshing at the time, I think.
Yeah. Any thoughts on anybody else on the track before we move on? Because again, we're going longer than I expected, but that's fine.
Yeah, we can move on to this. I love this record. I highly
no
recommend
thoughts.
that people check out Lustmore. Lapalux has a cool career in general. Like the next Lapalux record, Ruinism, is very different than this. A lot more kind of into an R&B, a little more industrial. A lot of interesting releases after this. The 2019 record is pretty good too, but this record is the one that really fits neatly into that sort of lane, and it was just like a really, I loved this record in like late high school, early college. A great album artwork too. I always loved the infinite hall of mirrors thing.
Yeah. Let's move on to our next song then, which is Mirror Kisses, aka George Clanton with Runaways.
Yeah, this is another one we can kind of go quickly on because I included it because Alex put this on his playlist, and it was one of the only ones on his playlist I had not heard before. And so I was like, let me listen to this and see. And I really liked this. I wasn't aware of this Mirror Kisses project, but I knew George Clanton, and I thought, oh, well, this will be good to include because I think George Clanton is a very influential person of this sort of era, and another example of like things that sort of spawn out of this era, you know?
Yeah, this song rocks.
Yeah, this is my second favorite song on the playlist, I think. And I'm someone that has generally kind of become like mostly anti-80s synth pop revival, like that kind of shit. But this just works. Like, I think maybe because it's like, it's funny that like, I feel like everyone has like a specific band or artist, like 2 or 3, like when Discover Weekly started coming out, like they attach themselves to. George Clanton was one of those where like, I heard If It Makes the Babies Want to Cry on like one of my first Discover Weekly playlists, and I fell in love pretty quickly. So like, I've got a soft spot for George Clanton, even though I haven't listened to like his most recent stuff all that much, and I feel like I should.
I totally forgot about this. Matty, do you know who George Clanton recently collaborated on a full-length record?
Of course, Nick Hakim from
Nick Hexum.
Nick Hexum from 311.
Yeah,
it's a great
I had forgotten
record.
Briefly.
I really like that album.
It's fun. It is a fun record. George Clanton's a cool guy. I think it's interesting you say that, Matty, because that's the same reaction you had when I played you the what's it called? Too Much MIDI, the song from the Ford and Lopatin album.
That's right.
And I think it's a similar sort of thing where, like Daniel Lopatin, aka 106 Point Never, he understands that the way that in order to do this style of music, you've got to be a really like precise technical, because like the best of this 80s synth pop music was like this kind of pinnacle of this early analog sort of elaborate, expensive sounding for the time production. It's like, if you're gonna throw back to that, you can't just kind of lazily do it in Ableton. Like, you've got to be a real like nerd for the details of it.
Yes.
And I think that that's why the sound got really played out, is because you had a lot of people that were just kind of doing like, all right, have the do Robin bass line and we're good, right? And it's like, no, you've got to do a little more than that. You've got to give it a little more, like, there's a lot of little pops of color throughout this track. Like, and also I think that, not to just segue us into the next song and dunk on Neon Indian, but like, a thing I've always wanted out of Neon Indian that I didn't quite get is like this manages to have like a big kind of pop chorus that makes it feel 80s in that way and and like swing for the fences, but it doesn't sacrifice the chillness of it. It still feels very laid back, even though it's kind of got that big dramatic payoff to it that I sometimes wish that other bands of this ilk had more of. You know, like, this song has a real like hook to it in a way I appreciated.
Yeah. Again, it's good songwriting. It's good songwriting. It's knowing how to use the technology and having the songs to back it up to good stuff. Again, I got to listen to more George Clanton.
George Clanton is very tasteful in general, I think.
Yeah,
he's always struck me as that.
Good stuff. And actually, that brings me to a quick sidebar. I feel like we talk about chillwave. I feel like there was a similar darker movement going on, like a similar darker, much more lo-fi movement that was going on at the same time. That was kind of pulling from like the same kind of sources, which was hypnagogic pop, of course. You know, your, regretfully to say, your Ariel Pinks, your John Mileses, your Hype Williams, to mention Dean Blunt.
Like, we all agreed that John Mouse wasn't there, right?
He was that again. I think John Mouse, he was there more or less. Like,
I didn't see him.
I think, again, of course, he was there insofar as just like, I'm just curious of like what this shit show is, versus like, I agree with the Trump politics, whereas like Ariel Pink was like, oh, I'm with Trump, he's my president, all that bullshit. Again, the fact that Pink has turned into full grifter, like full like right wing grifter, and John Mouse has not done that, I feel like it's safe to say, like, okay, I don't think he was there for like totally political reasons, misguided reasons, but not totally political ones.
Or he's just smart and knows to shut
that
up.
Too.
That's
Too.
the other possibility. Maybe he's just like
I was not trying to get into a January 6th conversation. I was just trying to.
He just thought Ariel said he was going to a poker game.
You're right. Like
I just want to insert Dean Blunt into this conversation.
Of course, yes. I know. But you're right that it's like there was a lot of stuff in the air at this period of time that was trying to harness and tap into this stuff, and especially in the years afterward. And you could make connections to like the Crystal Castles type stuff that takes it in more of a dark wave direction as well. Yeah, exactly. Like I just think that a lot of this is really just the various effects of more and more bands and artists who are dabbling in non necessarily electronic styles of music, or even electronic styles of music, then incorporating like, all right, now I have these tools of my laptop, and what can I do to incorporate that? And that's like what is kind of connecting a lot of this stuff.
I mean, it only makes sense that like, coming out of, the post-punk revival of the 2000s, like a fucking course, there would be like a new wave to kind of come from that. And that was chillwave. That was hypnagogic pop. And that, was eventually, what turned into the 80s synth pop revival.
And a good transition to our next song, which I think we'll have more to say than this one.
Oh, butter. Oh, buddy. It's Deadbeat Summer by Neon Indian. I'm just gonna say off jump. More like Deadbeat track because it stinks.
Wow,
I don't like the song.
Damn.
I don't like the song. This song
pains
sucks.
Of being pure at heart caught a stray bullet out of nowhere. Now the Neon Indian shade. What have I walked into?
And here's the thing.
Matty,
I like Vega International Night School. I think that's a pretty good record. Aside from like, well, that's a record that like there's some really great stuff, and then it kind of falls apart towards the end. But that's a different conversation.
I am
I don't like
reeling right now, Matty. No, I'm reeling because that different conversation is a long established dynamic where like you've always been the one that like at the time liked Vega International more than I did, and I never really got that album. I like this a lot more than where Neon Indian end up later, and I feel like I'm one of the only people that feels that way. I don't know. Like I like this. I don't love this song, but I like this song more than kind of where they end up later. I don't know. I've always felt like there is sometimes like something that is so close to exactly your sort of thing and not connecting. A lot of times that's worse than something that's just dramatically not your thing. And that's, I think, always been the case for me with Neon Indian. It's like they so much seem like they should be my kind of thing on paper that I feel like I am almost predisposed to be harsh to them just because people constantly act like I should like them and I don't, and then I get frustrated by that. So I'm like, fuck this band. Like that's always kind of been like my relationship with like Animal Collective is another great example. Like everyone's like, but the everything about you, surely you like Animal Collective. And it's like, no, I don't. And it's always kind of been me with Neon Indian, but I like this song. Like I think this taps into, I don't know. I think this is just a very catchy little tune in a way that reminds me of like the Starfucker song we talked about on the Pandora episode, like it's just a nice little good groove, and I like the guitar texture on this song.
Yes, I understand not liking it. Neon Indian is the only band on this playlist that I have any sort of like associated nostalgia with. This is a foundational band for me to smoke weed to in 2018 while I was in college. I don't remember. I think I like came across it by happenstance. I was trying to remember what the song the title of the song Polish Girl was, because the song doesn't have any indication of what the song is. And I remember like seeing a Reddit thread and I was like, the name Neon Indian just sounds like a band name that would make a song that sounds like Polish Girl, and lo and behold, I was right. Which maybe speaks to the idea that like chillwave kind of wears its genre on its sleeve. They like washed out. they just kind of embraced the aesthetic of it
I mean,
all and
Neon
roll with it.
Indian is like if you are writing like a comedy now that is like a period piece set in this time, like Neon Indian would be like the joke of what the band was called. Like it feels very like of its time in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, no, I feel like Neon Indian because I mean Alex was talking about there potentially being a comeback. I think the smartest thing that they did, I mean it probably was just for their own personal reasons, but I feel like them not releasing an album for since
I would
Big
love for there
International
to
Night
be a
School.
whole a Neon Indian name controversy in 2023. That would be really funny.
Yeah,
If we had a Gilla band-esque like this band needs to change their name situation.
Yeah, you're reminding me. I made a funny joke about what Neon Indian would have to call themselves back on Monday, but I never like wrote notes for this
Neon
playlist.
Indigenous Peoples.
Yeah, it was better than that, but it was something along those lines.
Oh, sorry.
You're all good.
My riff wasn't up to snuff.
I was thinking about it all night, so that's why it was better.
I understand.
But this playlist or like Neon Indian is a band that like it speaks to my sensibilities. I like some glitzy electronic music that I really can just turn my brain off to. And I think for the most part they provide that. I remember seeing someone with a Neon or a Vega International Night School shirt at a concert, and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool." And then like 2 years later, I was like, oh, "What are you talking about, man? That guy wasn't cool." But I think this band is fine. And I accept your slander with open arms, Matty. It's okay.
Again, I didn't expect to be a hater for this song, but I was just like, nope. Like this like I was not a hater for Washed Out. I think Feel It All Around is a good song. Again, Toro, I think he's of the chillwave stuff. I think his stuff is, he is one of the 3 core people for a reason because I think he's fucking great, and I think all this stuff. I will say it's very funny that like back in like 2017, I was like, the Toro stuff. Like I love Boo Boo, and the rest of the stuff, it's all right, but not, it's good, but I don't love it as much as this. And now I'd be like, oh yeah, like aside from like one record, it's got a pretty solid discog, I would say. Like, and even the one record that I don't like, I feel like if I went back to it now, I probably like appreciate it a little more, which is his pivot to indie rock, of What For.
And the thing about that record is that even though that's a lot of people would identify that as like his weakest record, his new album is basically like, what if I went back to that and made it better? And
exactly.
It's like awesome. So now it's like you do now, even the one thing I wasn't sure about how well you do that, now you do that well too. Like
exactly. And there we go. And that's important. Michael, yeah, I feel like you're dying to talk, dying to say some more.
No, I will say I love this record. I think Psychic Chasms is like, it's Causers of this, the Feel It All Around EP, and Psychic Chasms. Those to me are the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit of chillwave. I can even remember when Polish Girl came out, and at the time thinking to myself, if maybe the song was too hi-fi, had Neon Indian maybe sold out, which I think speaks to how much of a chillwave purist I was back in the day. But no, I love this song. I love this record. I can get it not being your thing, Matty. That's okay with me. I totally get it. But yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia specifically for this song. It's probably my favorite song on the playlist, if I'm being honest.
Damn. All right. I mean, I feel bad. I feel bad. Not really. I don't feel bad at all. Actually,
I'm a big boy.
I love being a hater.
I can take it.
Question, Michael: is the terminally chill from your bio, is that a reference to the song on this record?
That's absolutely a Neon Indian reference. I hope we get a Neon Indian record or Neon Indian name discourse in 2023. I'll take either. I just want to read that name on Pitchfork again.
Now this record name, Psychic Chasms, I'm thinking, what if Neon Indian and Smokey Robinson linked up for Psychic Gasms?
That's true. They could team up.
Sign me the fuck up.
Sounds
I-
tantric.
Hell of a tour
I'm surprised. I
package.
think this is the first time we're mentioning Gasms on the podcast, even though Gasms has been
I mean,
like a meme in our Discord
we're
for.
saving it because we're gonna do a 9-part investigative series on gasms that's gonna be very serious and solemn.
Are
when
psychic
we-
what-
gasms and
I mean-
hands-free gasms related?
Oh God, Jesus Christ!
Sorry.
Let's
That's
okay,
my
we're
bad.
done. No, I was gonna continue
That's
the
my
bit.
bad.
Bit's over. We're done.
I
Pull it. It's
into the
trash it.
ground.
End it. It's over. All right, next song. This is one that I guess I get it, but it's also like I'm not sure. But you know what? Fuck it.
I mean, this is partly my own bias of just like my perception of this genre of music. Clams Casino is the second most important artist to me of this playlist. My holy trinity as far as this style of music is Shlohmo, Clams Casino, Flying Lotus. That is my Father, Son,
All
Holy
three
Spirit.
bands that I would at least Shlohmo. Shlohmo, I don't know enough. I do know about Clams and about Flying Lotus to be like chillwave. I would not consider it like that's not my first thought.
I mean, necessarily, but I think this EP is the one of Clams's that I would sort of, because I think obviously he's most associated with rap music, and like his big projects were these instrumental mixtapes that like I just know that like the reason why we have a different context for Clams Casino is that when I posted this song, you were immediately like trying to figure out where you had heard someone else rapping over this.
Yes.
And for me, I prefer to listen to the instrumental versions of Clams Casino beats because for me, I am just like, I want to get lost in the soup of Clams Casino. I was really, really into the instrumental mixtapes in high school. I was a photography student in part of high school, like in the later periods when I had sort of like a little more flexibility and free periods and stuff. And so me and my other friend Max would often, when we had free periods or sometimes when we didn't have free periods, we would hang out in the dark room because we had a very small like photo dark room in the like art classroom. So we would be in the dark room, and in the dark room there was like a very janky iPod like speaker in there, and the music that I would play in the dark room on the aux cord was like Bad Bad Not Good, Flying Lotus, and Clams Casino, like on the regular. And this was me being like, I am an artsy teenager with cool, interesting taste. But I love Clams Casino so much, and I think that Clams, like I said, I think earlier in the episode, is like such a important, crucial figure in me becoming obsessed with like texture and music, and how that sets the tone for me being really into shoegaze. Like the same part of my brain that loves songs that are just like 80% guitar fuzz loves these Clams Casino songs where it's just like him taking a sample or a synth line and just stretching it as far as it goes until you start to hear like those like digital artifacts that are created. And I think that's why I associate, I mean, this EP in general has a lot of the same kind of atmosphere, you know, like all of the nature sounds that are on this EP have that kind of Shlohmo, a vibey, atmospheric, weed smoking vibe to them, but then how he has these big sub bass hits and these really, really loud claps that sort of not only just cut through the instrumentals, but like I've always been fascinated with the way that these big skeletal beats sort of give shape to the washes of sound around it. And he's an incredibly important artist in my development as a music fan, and is someone who to this day I will just throw on instrumental relics or any of the instrumental mixtapes, or just like Lil B I'm God or whatever. But this is the song I picked. I could have picked a lot of Clams Casino songs. I thought that this EP was the most explicitly chillwave, and I also think that this is an EP that I was talking with Ted about this actually, that I liked at the time. It was never my favorite of the Clams Casino stuff, but it's the one I go back to now, and it feels kind of the most unique to me of a lot of the early Clams stuff. Like it feels like him trying to flesh out his sound beyond just making these beats for people to rap over and having them be like standalone instrumental tracks. And I think that this song does a really good job of that, of like being able to create a really immersive atmosphere without relying on like a big sample in the way a lot of the other Clams Casino beats do. And I think that it's impressive for that reason. Yeah, I love the song and Clams Casino in general.
Can I play the rap song that you
Yes,
you mentioned?
Yeah.
This is a guy. This is deep. Like, this is not even something I would put on the Rap Forum veterans playlist because it's too deep of a pull. And that's Rob Banks.
It remains fascinating to me, the guys who had access to Clams Casino beats, because like he wasn't that big of a deal, or even still isn't even that big of a deal. But like to me, for how big of a deal he was to me, I was always just like, why are we not using these Clams Casino beats for like better artists? Sometimes was kind of how I felt. You know what I mean? Like, we're really giving these out to Rob Banks.
See, this one I'm not sure if this was like Clams Casino gave him the approval, or just like he just heard the beat and was like, I'm just gonna rap over this.
I'm just gonna rap over this situation. But there was a lot of Clams Casino getting rapped over in this era, like with people like Space Ghost Perp, and really cloud rap as a genre is a classic example of people just describing Clams Casino and stuff that sounds like Clams Casino. Like, that genre wouldn't exist at all without how distinctive Clams' sound was specifically, and how people had to come up with a term for it because he was all over the place during this era.
This song just made me want to listen to Boards of Canada.
I get that. I understand. I think that there's something like, he's clearly in the lineage of Boards of Canada, but I really like the kind of more hyper digital aesthetic of Boards of Canada. Like, Boards of Canada is like a foundational artist for me, but outside of their very best work, sometimes you can listen to like Music Has the Rights of Children and it can feel a little, not chintzy, but you know what I mean, like kind of dated in its 90s-ness.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always just liked how Clams Casino's music is so digital. It's so like someone throwing stuff into Fruity Loops. And like, we haven't talked about Vaporwave at all in this episode, but I think Clams Casino is like the perfect intersection between Vaporwave and Chillwave. Is like, Vaporwave was all about taking these like found sound materials and like stretching them like silly putty in these digital processing programs to create these like new textures and soundscapes and stuff. And I think that Clams was just like a very like, his particular sound is just like, I can't overstate how much it has shaped my own like perception of stuff. And all of the rap songs that he produced of this era, like I'm God, and the stuff he's done for Vince Staples, and all of the ASAP Rocky tracks from this era, like just really, really classic stuff for me as like
foundational.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Let's move on. We got two more songs left.
Michael, do you have any thoughts about Clams?
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad, Michael.
Shout out to Rob Banks first and foremost for being Shaggy's son.
Yes.
Thank
you for mentioning, Michael.
I always forget about that.
It's so funny that like there's like, it was like you had this specific era of like rap, like sort of like blog rap era where it's like, oh, that's Shaggy's son, and then you get to little Tracy who's like, oh, that's the guy from Digital Planet's son. Just very, very funny, the nepotism kids of rap music.
Yeah, the first generation of rappers being old enough to have kids who are then like young rising rappers. I'm trying to think who the other like examples of that are.
Anyways, Michael, while we're thinking about that, Michael, continue, of course. But thank you for... It's good you know who Rob Banks is.
Yeah, absolutely. Nardwar voice, we have to know Rob Banks. No, I love Clams Casino. I'm right there with you as his production being foundational, and I think if anything, cloud rap and what he was doing, if not chillwave, certainly kindred spirits and music that's trying to convey a similar vibe or a similar mood. But no, yeah, the Instrumental Relics album, that's like a lot of the beats Clams Casino made for Lil B, ASAP Rocky, etc. For the past few years, that's been my go-to when I'm looking for music to have on in the background. That's like the album I spring for 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, that's got a lot of his best tracks. If anyone is out there looking to dive into instrumental Clams Casino, the instrumental Relics is like I'm glad he really put it out, because it's now this perfect, like, hey, if you're looking for like what he was doing, it doesn't have all of the stuff, like some of those beats um are still only, you can hear them on SoundCloud and stuff, but that compilation has a lot of the crucial stuff. I really like I'm the Devil. That's another good one. There's a lot of Swervin' was always a big one for me. I really like Crystals. I love one that's, I don't think is on streaming. Haunt Me. That's like one of my favorite Clams Casino. If anyone is, I don't know if anyone cares about this, but if you pull up Haunt Me in like a digital audio workstation, or like in a DJ software or whatever, and look at the waveform for Haunt Me, it is so wild, because he's like put so many like crazy compressions and effects on it that like you see the audio file like goes up and down and like squiggles around and gets compressed into all these weird shapes, and it's like, God, what the fuck were you doing in the studio that day? Like, it really is bizarre the way he processes some of these audio things, but like he was one of the best people at like taking the limitations of these softwares at the time and finding really unique strange ways of doing it, and then somehow finding a way to make that pretty accessible and like mainstream. I still think it's fascinating like how big a lot of these songs were able to get, and like I just think it's a really cool particular moment.
Yeah. Well then, let's move on to our next track then. Feels from Giraffage. I think I said that right.
This is a late minute edition. I swapped this in for another song by Evenings, which is or Babe. I forget which one is the artist and which one is the track, but like there's a lot of music from this area. I think I would lump this in a little bit with like the xxyyxx stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say this definitely feels like
it
the genre.
feels,
People trying to pivot away from the genre into like, again, like kind of seeing the Clams Casino mold and being like, okay, I can kind of like put some trap beats on this and kind of get take this to the next level. Even though I think the xxyyxx in this one, I don't think are very good
on it, and everything I think is what really makes it feel a little dated. I think just a lot of the like drum sounds and stuff feels very like of this particular moment in a way, because like as this chill wave stuff starts to really get popping, you get a lot of people, especially like after Flume and those people start to pop off to the point that they're able to make the jump over into straight up EDM. You have a lot of people that start popping up doing like tropical house and all of this other like very like bad vibey music. But I think this is a pretty nice kind of like, Giraffage is a guy that has stuck around and I think has found over time like a better lane for himself. He's always been someone that's dabbled in a lot of different kinds of things, and now with this Body Sync project with Ryan Hemsworth, it seems like both of them are guys that were like floating around the scene for a while and then sort of finally found the place that made sense for them together as a duo. But he's always been a guy that I liked. He's always fun to see live if you ever have a chance to see him DJ or whatever. And I think that all of the Body Sync stuff especially is really fantastic. But yeah, this project, I mean, this early Giraffage stuff just does feel, there's a little nostalgia to it just because I remember this era well and loving songs like Tell Me and this song, but also, yeah, it definitely feels stuck in time a little bit.
It's the 808s and like the trap drums. It's just like, again, I just can't at this point in time. I just cannot. I just heard
your brain turns off. It's also the other thing it's reacting to besides chillwave. It's really like, oh, Young Lean just happened is the other thing I think.
Yeah, but even the Young Lean stuff it didn't sound like this. No, like Young didn't rely on like
it's too clean. That's what's like bothering you, is that like music that is trying to be this atmospheric, a lot of the time they would do that with like the kind of analog or even fake analog textures, and I think this just feels a little too cleaned up. And so it just has like, yeah, there's kind of a sheen to it that is a little off-putting. Even though I don't hate this song. I like it fine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, any
It
other?
felt indicative of a style of this music that I felt like wasn't represented by the rest of the playlist. That's why I decided to include it. I thought about including Sleepless by Flume, which is the only Flume song I would really categorize as being adjacent to chillwave, like pretty immediately after the first Flume album in 2012. He moves away from this sort of sound. But like I think that this sort of Giraffage sound, part of why it sounds so chintzy is that immediately this sort of aesthetic gets strip mined by all of the kind of bad EDM pop of the 2010s, and so you're hearing a lot of that like trickle down also, basically. Also, fun fact, there's a Giraffage collab with Japanese Breakfast on his 2017 album that I think is very, it's like he got that collab at the last moment that it was a little bit easier to get that collab.
It's like right before she becomes like just too hard to
right before the price went up.
Exactly. Any other lingering thoughts on the song before we move on to our final track of the evening?
I think that's about it.
I also want to say real quick, this sounded very Purity Ring to me.
Oh yeah,
that's a good pull.
I'd never heard this before. I liked it. 10 years ago, if I would have heard this after like 4 beers, I might have freestyled to it. So it was cool.
Oh, yeah. I think a good important thing to like contextualize Giraffage is that he is someone that, in addition to having a lot of kind of very like internet minded reference points, is like along with Ryan Hemsworth was like very much known at the time for being like not memey, but like very like of this sort of internet culture, you know, very like, and so Giraffage was a guy that like I remember seeing like him and Ryan Hemsworth DJ, and like he would play like a DJ edit where it takes like music from Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and puts like a 3-6 Mafia rap over it. Like that's this guy's kind of vibe, is like a very kind of whimsical, cutesy sort of like anime internet sort of vibe colliding with these like chill electronic. He's sort of like a less poppy Porter Robinson in some ways. Like there's a little bit of that sort of thing going on. But yeah, he's not a guy that you necessarily like that was like super important to me at the time, but he was always around.
Yeah. Well then, let's move on to our final track of the night. It's Zodiac shit, Flying Lotus.
Oh yes. Had to end with another very foundational track to me. Again, Flying Lotus is like one of these that could sort of be on the edge, but these first 2 Flying Lotus records particularly, before he really departs into a more jazz and sort of psychedelic oriented sound on the next couple of releases, I think these first 2 Flying Lotus EPs I think are still my favorite of his, even if there's like records I think maybe are more impressive. These just are so like Clams Casino and like Shlohmo, very sentimental and very just like incredibly important records for me. Like Los Angeles in particular, the one that comes before this, is just like a real I think groundbreaking moment in music in general, but for me specifically, it was like a record that I just obsessed over all through high school. And I've always contended like Flying Lotus to me, and these early 2 Flying Lotus albums just like feel to me how Los Angeles at night feels like in the summertime, the kind of like warm air and the kind of like dreaminess, but also like creepiness and kind of sort of just, I don't know. It's something very indefinable for me. And so without getting into like all the individual things I like about the music and this song, it's just this kind of very abstract thing. And also was just like, Flying Lotus was so important. Like going back earlier in the episode when I was talking about like things that sort of friends that I had that were like maybe a little cooler than me people whose music taste I would sort of look to. Like Flying Lotus was just such a like cool people knew about this guy, especially growing up in Los Angeles at the time where he was such a massive figure. And then like you have all of the not I'm getting blank, Captain Murphy, like all that stuff happens and the hype around that whole deal. Like he was just such a huge figure of my adolescence, and I saw him several times. I saw him at Low End Theory Festival in like 2016 or 17, around the You're Dead era. Just a great artist. I mean, we can get into kind of where his career is at now, and Rose's favorite joke to make about how Flamagra doesn't exist. But this early Flying Lotus era, it's like he is the kind of artist where he could make dog shit for the rest of time, and he still gave me these first couple of records and EPs, and like that's enough for me for life, because these couple of EPs are so foundational for like my taste. And Cosmogram and Zodiac shit in particular feels like the song more than any other that invented Adult Swim music. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
The only thing you could really take away from this song is how much it defined a sort of an entire sound, a lane of like alternative hip hop and R&B sound that then got strip mined for the next several years. So maybe it doesn't sound quite as fresh if you don't have the same sentimental attachment as I do. But like this song is one of the Flying Lotus songs that still hits every single time for me.
Yeah, I mean it's good. I do think putting it on here is going to be controversial, because I think definitely like this being chillwave again. I would not again, but we've had it so many times at this point that I can't even try to fight it. It's like Flying Lotus chillwave.
It is,
sure,
as Michael,
you're more the expert than I am.
Episode, it is very funny of all genres of music to get like granular and like referee-ish about chillwave.
It's like the people that get mad at it's like the people who get mad at Holiday Kirk when he posts something that is like
it's specifically funny for chillwave of all genres. Like I guess it makes more sense for people to be like very worked up about emo and be like that's emo or that's not emo, but like the music genre that is entirely about chilling.
Yeah, you'd think they'd be too busy chilling.
We needed to smoke more weed before this episode, or maybe smoke less weed.
Look, I'm the kind of twisted white boy that when I smoke weed, I get angry.
Don't let the.
Oh damn! Really?
No, but I don't like smoking weed anymore. It makes me paranoid.
The Cam tweet from yesterday about don't let the twisted white boy listen to Mac on me.
God, one of our finest minds, truly. But yeah, again, good stuff. Again, the early Flying Lotus stuff. It is like you do forget like just how good and how like just like singular it was at the time, where it's like no one was making stuff like it was very much in the vein of like your Mad Libs and your Jay Dillas, but it very much felt like okay, this is the evolution of that, and like no one is quite doing this, like doing things like Flatlow. And even then I feel like a lot of artists like they were not able to catch up. Like no 100%. Other producer was even able to like come close to like recreating like the Flying Lotus sound. And if they did not do it very well. And by the time that people
there are a ton of other people in that whole like I went to Low End Theory Festival one of the last years that they still had it, where a lot of these artists had blown up way bigger. Like Flying Lotus was a way bigger artist, and Earl Sweatshirt was there, and Anderson .Paak actually played that festival. It was the week that he was on Compton like 6 times, and so he was like doing a victory lap, and I literally remember that night being like, wow, this guy is going to be very famous. And then years later he's DJ Pee Wee. But that's a story for another day. But no, yeah, there's a lot of guys like No Sag Thing is another person I thought about that take some of this stuff in a little bit more of an experimental direction. And you've got people like Ross G and Teebs that do the same sort of sample-delic beat stuff, and all of the Low End Theory guys. But like, no, you're right. There is no one that was able to tap into all of these things and make it fresh. And I think that was the thing that is and remains so impressive to me, is that this album cracked my brain open like an egg when I heard it the first time, because I had not heard every DJ Shadow and J Dilla and Madlib album yet. And so part of it was like the freshness to me. But the amazing thing was that when I went back and got into Madlib and got super obsessed with J Dilla and other stuff, this album didn't lose any of its potency. And that speaks to how he was able to take those influences and iterate on them and incorporate other influences. Like, I love Tom York's appearance on this record, and the first Flying Lotus Thundercat link up happens on this record. Like, it just feels like really of its time, but still holds up to this day.
You had to be there, folks. You had to be there. And but that is it. There is
That's
now
it.
gone. We are done with this for now. Michael,
Chill.
thank you so much for coming on the pod. Anything you want to plug before we head out?
Thank you for having me back. I guess I'll plug my podcast, Endless Scroll, podcast about music, the internet, where those two things intersect. How novel. We're available wherever podcasts are. We're also on Patreon if you want to check us out there. That's all I got. Once again,
Beautiful
thanks
plug.
for having me.
Yes, and this is I just want to say I gotta I gotta be a man, and if I'm gonna talk my shit, I gotta do it face to face. We just put out a bonus episode on Shibuya Kai. It was a Patreon playlist, and in the description I said, we're not Endless Scroll where we're smart about music and shit. Like, bring this Shibuya Kai stuff to them where they can talk about the history of the genre and how it all connects to all that shit. We just talk about some guys, and chillwave, even though we didn't talk about a lot of guys, here's the thing. There weren't guys in chillwave, but the people that listen to chillwave, those were the guys.
Those guys that construed
we could
an
have gotten
idea.
more into the YouTube comment world, and gotten funky with it that way. But yeah,
I feel like we were kind of decent vessels for the YouTube commenters of the world. We had our own little formative experiences with the genre.
I mean,
We-
Jackie
feel
was
like-
literally
I
just
feel
being like, this again. I'm listening to this
I feel
10
like
years later, and
similar
it
to
still
we-
holds up.
Who's still listening in 2023?
exactly.
The fact that the fact that Showwave is like, we go back to 2009. Showwave is old. Like, it is like Showwave is like gonna be in high school next year. That's just
Yeah.
crazy to think about.
Chillwave is
Endless
asking
Scroll
fourth wave
podcast.
emo to buy beer from the store, if you know what I mean.
No, but speaking of the Endless Scroll podcast, you talked about
That's
this
a
little
good one.
Jesus Christ. Oh, no, but like, there is a certain thing that happens where the first time that you as a music listener see the thing that is heralded as, oh, this is going to be the new thing, and then you live long enough to see it not become the new thing and become just like a moment in time. And that is like a very, I think, formational music experience, because I think when you're like an impressionable teenager, it's like, wow, something new is happening in music, and therefore it must be totally unique and important because I am here for this and I wasn't here for that other stuff.
The
And
UK
I think
post-punk wave that we nicknamed the Gremlin mindset.
Hey, but it's a helpful experience, you know, to learn, like, it forms your jaded skepticism that you then bring with you to other waves of music, like the indie sleaze revival of
Yes.
the 2020s. And I think that's a perfect place to end it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael, for coming on. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Jackie. Next week, we had to shift some things around. We are going to be doing Rap Forum Veterans Volume 2, but we had to push that back a week, as next week, well, you're going to be hearing Jackie and Max again. Middle School Dance Volume 3. It's
Oh, wow.
is this the end of the trilogy, or is there going to be more after this?
Well, this is the end of the I thought, okay, is this yes, this is the Slow Dance episode. This is the end of the trilogy, yes.
The Slow Dance
Iron.
episode might have a lot of overlap with the Ooh, this song is so sad playlist that we...
I don't think there's, but yes, we have to avoid. We have a couple of different episodes that sort of, actually, yeah, there's one or two of these we're gonna have to sort of make sure that we don't overlap there. But yes, we are doing another Middle School Dance episode. This time we are going to be discussing not the dance floor anthems, but we are going to be discussing slow dance songs from middle school dance era. We're going to get real emotional, grab somebody, hold them close, etc.
Grab someone sexy, tell them hey.
Yeah,
In the words of
that was the
Neo.
instructions, and now we've done it, and now it's time to make our move, display our riz, make it happen on the dance floor.
Jesus Christ. All right. We'll see y'all next week for another episode of the Indieheads podcast. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.